All right, so today I decided to focus on conservation and the difficulties facing the black-footed ferret, which is the only native ferret of North America. So a little bit about the black-footed ferret. First of all, they're adorable if you can't tell, but they are also known as the American polecat, the prairie dog hunter, and they are related to ermines, minks, and weasels. And their general classification is Mammalia, and they're a carnivore, so they're carnivora, and they're from the Mustelid family. In a general sense, females usually weigh 600 something grams to 850 grams, and males are a little bit bigger at around 900 to 1100 grams. And they come in an overall length of 380 to 600 millimeters long. They are generally a yellowish brown color, kind of a beige buff, with a paler underbelly, and they have a very striking face with a white forehead, muzzle, and throat, and they have their little black bandit masks, and also what they are known for and what they are named for is their black feet. This particular species has kind of a sad history in North America. They were once very, very plentiful and ranged all over the continent. However, after being first discovered around 1851 by Audubon and Bachman, they had a very quick decline throughout the 20th century. And in 1979, they were actually considered extinct until someone's dog came and had caught one in 1981, and they were then declared no longer extinct. However, eventually they were truly extinct in the wild by 1987. Now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started a captive breeding program from 1991 to 2008, and they were reintroducing populations into the wild to try to restore them. Currently, there are only 4 self-sustaining populations in Arizona, South Dakota, and Wyoming. They have been reintroduced to other areas, however, they haven't been able to sustain themselves. Historically, as I said before, the black-footed ferret has been pretty much covering from Canada to Mexico. They are associated greatly with the Great Plains because that's their main habitat. And so the Great Plains used to spread from southern Canada to northern Mexico. Now there's only those 3 populations, like I said before, in Arizona, South Dakota, and Wyoming that are officially established populations. And this is due to the fact that their habitat consists of grasslands, steppe, and shrub steppe or scrubland type areas. And this habitat is actually important more because it is the habitat of the prairie dog, with which black-footed ferrets have a very, very closely linked relationship with. They depend exclusively on them for their burrows and as their food. So the decline in available habitat has greatly affected them. This is just a good map showing the range that used to be the black-footed ferrets. Everything in gray is what they historically used to cover. And now just the little purple dots are the reintroduced sites, and even of those, only 4 of them have self-sustaining populations. So you can see that that's such a drastic decline in what their numbers used to be. A little bit about their biology. Overall, the black-footed ferret reproduces fairly well. Their mating season is from March to April, and their gestation period is 41 to 43 days, and the kits are born May through June, so they have summer babies. And litter sizes are usually 3 to 5 kits. Kits are born completely blind and helpless, and so their mother keeps them below ground until they're old enough to start to learn to hunt, and they will be relocated to a different area. So about 2 months old, they start to pop their heads out, and mother starts taking them on hunting trips. At 3 months old, the kits are almost completely grown. They're about 90% of their adult size, and they are extremely adept at killing prairie dogs at this point. So mother's taught them well. Their bodies, as you can see, are very typical for the mustelid family. They're very long, they're lean, they're low to the ground. Even though they're tiny, they're very powerful little creatures. They have very, very short limbs and 5 toes, and they have a very blunt face with a long brain case. So they're a little crafty. So as stated previously, this poor little creature is in great decline. They're considered endangered, and that is mostly due to three main things, and two of them are very closely entwined. Actually, all of them are closely entwined, but specifically the loss of prey, which is mostly prairie dogs, as stated before, and specifically the black-tailed prairie dog. However, after decline in that population, the black-footed ferret did switch over to hunting white-tailed prairie dogs. And they make up most of the diet of the ferret, so because of habitat loss, the prairie dogs populations have declined, and therefore that has affected the black-footed ferret. And second, as stated, is habitat loss. The grasslands and the steppes and the shrub and scrubland are the main living areas of prairie dogs, and that habitat is being destroyed. So those are really, really closely entwined together, and that's really the main large overseeing cause of endangerment of this species. And thirdly is what's known as the sylvatic plague. It's caused by, it's a bacteria, and it's caused by Yersinia pestis, which is a bacterial disease, and it's an endemic that has affected many rodent species all over the continent. It's an introduced disease, and it not only affects black-footed ferrets, but it also affects the prairie dogs and a lot of the other rodent species in the grasslands area. And it's spread mostly through flea bites or ingestion of fleas. So in my research, there are quite a few management plans out there and things like that are working on reestablishing, mostly they focus on the reestablishment of the prairie dogs, and there's always a section in there about how that is going to help, or it's going to reintroduce also the black-footed ferret populations. So concerning the specific problems that we saw with the sylvatic plague, especially efforts with for example, like the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, they have discovered that they have been able to create a vaccination against the sylvatic plague, and that when the ferrets are inoculated, it improves their survival in the wild from the sylvatic plague. So instead of just trying to capture them and inject them, they have developed a vaccine that can be put in bait, and so it's eaten by the ferrets, and it can just be put out into the field so the ferrets can ingest it and build immunity that way. So that's one way to help counteract the sylvatic plague. Another is, since there's such a close tie between the ferrets and the prairie dogs, dusting the prairie dog burrows to kill lice, which are the main spreader of the sylvatic plague, is also another effort being made to try and minimize rodent and ferret death in a general sense from the sylvatic plague. Now, concerning habitat and prey loss, since they are so closely intertwined, the recovery of prairie dog habitat must be a main priority in order to rebuild these prairie dog populations. And though I keep saying prairie dog recovery this, prairie dog recovery that, they really go hand in hand with ferret. So unless the prairie dog populations are built back up, there will not be a successful reintroduction of the black-footed ferret. So once the habitat can be recovered and conserved for the prairie dog, that will ensure a continued reintroduction of the black-footed ferret will be more successful, since a higher food source population will be present. And another problem with habitat loss, a huge part of it is due to all of it being converted to croplands, being used for farming. That whole middle section of the country, when you drive across it, is all farmland. And that used to not be that case. It was originally the Great Plains, which is perfect ferret habitat. And so a large percent of prairie dog fatality is due to poisoning from cropland runoff, things like pesticides. And so looking at what I found, I couldn't quite find actions that are actually being taken to minimize the damage from this, but in a general sense, from what I've studied and things I've read, I would say there would have to be some sort of change in the way that farming is, whether it's using different types of pesticides or banning the use of pesticides, maybe pushing organic farming that doesn't use pesticides, or even just making the scale of the farming smaller, maybe going back to a focus of small scale farming. The main thing is that it's going to have to be a restoration of the habitat, and that's the key factor. And that is really what's going to change whether or not those populations, those 4 little populations of the black-footed ferret are going to be successful in spreading back to their original range, all the way from Canada to Mexico. And that's really what the key factor is. It's almost more save the prairie dog and you will save the ferret.